Hey, this is Brittany, CEO and founder of Talented Teams Consulting, where I work with HR departments of one to help you to build your career and grow with intention. So we are back with day 4 of this 30-day series that we're going to go over the course of 6 weeks, where we're talking about ways to build your HR department of one career with intention, highlighting a few areas that might be a little overlooked from time to time, but also giving you kind of a blueprint of where you should focus your time and energy. So I started my career, and I talk about it often, as an unpaid intern. And I keep saying that because I want it to be clear to you, no matter where you are starting today, whether you are an unpaid intern, whether you are an aspiring HR professional, whether you've been in your HR career for 5, 7, 15 years, and you know that there's something more on the other side of it, but you really don't know what's possible because you haven't seen it. You really don't know what's possible because there's not been a blueprint of that within your organization. I've been exactly where you are in terms of knowing that there's something else that's on the other side, but how do you get there? So that's why I created this channel and I'm creating this video series, because I really want to help people just like you to build your career with intention. When I talk about intention, I'm talking about doing things not necessarily just on purpose, but also doing things with purpose. I think it's super, super important to make sure that you do things intentionally with your day, because you only have a certain amount of hours that you can really have an impact in your life, your family's life, your co-workers' lives. So you want to make sure that you are doing it on purpose and with purpose. And building your career is such a personal thing because your career is your livelihood. A lot of people find their meaning for their life within their work as well. So when you're talking about your career, you really want to make sure that it's one that you can be proud of, whether you know it can be fruitful, whether you know that you can be productive, and really make a difference in the lives of the people that you serve. And that's why this whole series is so important to me, because I know how impactful it can be if you really take seriously your own HR career development. So today we're going to talk about kind of what is HR. What are all the things that you should know as an HR leader, as an HR department of one, as an HR professional, and how do you know, how can you gauge whether you're proficient or whether you have areas where you can improve. Oftentimes people don't really know what HR is when you first get into the industry. I know I didn't. I had one HR leadership course under my belt, and in that class I think we pretty much talked about, just organizational things. It was really general. It was really overarching. But HR, if you just say, okay, well, you're an HR professional, that can mean anything. That can mean that you are a recruiter. That can mean that you are a payroll specialist. That can mean that you are a compensation specialist. There's so many things that are under the HR umbrella. So we're kind of going to break that down a little bit today to kind of give you some overarching buckets that you can think of. And by the end of this video, you should know kind of the areas where you kind of know that you are kind of uneasy when I say the title or when I say the bucket name. If you know, like, hey, I don't know much about this area, or I can really hone this a little bit more, it's going to give you a direction to kind of go into. The goal of this video is to make it so that when you go into your day and you're building your career and you are making space in your day for your own career development, you know what areas need to be developed. I think it's human nature to do things that we enjoy doing. You probably have things during your day, your 9 to 5, that you know is easy to do. You can probably do it in your sleep. But is that really where you should be spending the most of your time? You should probably be doing less of that work, because you can probably create some efficiencies around it, some processes around it, and then build in some time to hone up the skills of the areas that you need more support. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So why is this even important? How will you even go about doing this? I believe that this is important because if you're trying to position yourself to build your career as a strategic business partner, as an HR business partner, again, we're going back to creating efficiencies and going back to doing your day as efficiently as possible. It doesn't serve you well to only work in your sweet spot. Again, let me say that again. It does not serve you well to only work in your sweet spot. Great things happen when you push yourself in areas where you're going to feel challenged. Great things happen when you push yourself out of that comfort zone. It's very, very difficult to grow where you're comfortable. Again, it's very, very difficult to grow where you're comfortable. You've got to shake things up. You've got to do the hard things if you really want to see that success ultimately in your career. So again, when you're doing this, one of the first things you really want to make sure you're finding out is, where are you spending most of your time? Are you staying in the easy lane? Are you staying where it's comfortable? Are you staying where it's not difficult? Are you avoiding the more challenging work? Let's try to flip that on its head. So instead, Let's do less of the things that are easy so that you can spend more of your time in the complicated work, in the difficult work, and the thing that's going to cause you to use a different side of your brain that you're not used to using. This is going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. You're going to fight back with everything that you know. You're going to avoid it. But there's going to be so much satisfaction when you can get to the end of it, when you can get over that hurdle, and you can actually find like, hey, I did that. Hey, I'm becoming more proficient in this area. Hey, I used to always avoid this thing, but now if someone asks me a question about it, I can answer it confidently. So those are the things you want to start building in your career. Don't keep doing the easy things. Do the hard things, and you're going to find yourself and your own confidence to grow as a result of that. So now let's start identifying some gaps. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to start talking about some of the different disciplines within the HR department. And I want you to listen with intent. I want you to listen on purpose. So if you've been taking notes this whole time, I really want you to just kind of listen, put your pen down, just be very aware of your body, your own physical reaction when I say these phrases, when I say these disciplines. Be very sensitive to how you respond internally. If I say the first topic and you're like, you feel your chest tightening up, or you feel, just start to get really, really nervous because you know that that's not an area where you're very proficient. You know that you've not really dealt with that in your day-to-day. You know that you've done something in the past and maybe it didn't go right. And so now you're looking at everything and you're second guessing yourself. Think about those things when we're going through this next section, because I want to make sure that you can kind of pinpoint by the end of this video areas that you need to shore up. Why? Because as an HR department of one, we don't have the luxury, you don't have the luxury to avoid the hard things. As an HR department of one, you have to do those hard things because you're the only one to do it. That's one of the differences between being a specialist and a generalist. Typically, as an HR department of one, you are a generalist because you have to generally have knowledge of the entire HR disciplines. As a specialist, you can hone a certain skill in payroll. You can hone a certain skill in workers' comp. You can hone a certain skill when it comes to staffing, and that's your lane. You stay in that lane. But as an HR department of one, you don't have that luxury. So over the next few minutes, we're going to be talking about the several different HR disciplines. And I want you to do some internal introspective work to just see how are you reacting on the inside. And by the end of this video, I really want you to have an idea of where you need to focus on to make sure that you are growing in your career and growing in your confidence. So one of the areas is benefits. So of course, we're talking about benefits of health insurance, medical, dental, vision. Those things are typical. Maybe life insurance. Have you ever had to figure out a life insurance policy? Have you ever had an employee to pass away? And you have to figure, okay, so how do I help this employee's family to get the life insurance proceeds that they need to sustain their livelihoods? Or an employee, if you have accidental death and dismemberment insurance or long-term disability insurance, have you ever had an employee that's going to be on long-term disability? Do you know that process? What does it take for that person to actually be able to redeem or to start the process of certifying the disability that they have? And then also the benefits, you want to think about the retirement plans. So do you have a defined compensation plan or a defined benefit plan? Who administers your plan? How long have you been with that carrier of that retirement plan? Do you have a retirement plan? What is the vesting schedule of your retirement plan? Is there a vesting schedule for your retirement plan? All of these things are things that you should know, because if you have a new employee that's coming into your organization, they're going to have questions about their benefits. They may have come from a smaller organization or a larger organization. And as the HR department of one, you likely are smaller to mid-size. I would say maybe less than 150 employees or so. So you may not have the experience to answer the questions that they've had if they're coming from an employer that has 500 employees. But don't let that scare you away. If you know that the things that I've just routed off just now kind of give you a little bit of heartburn, write those things down now. And start to look into those things to kind of know that you're going to have to shore those things up, because you want to be prepared and you want to be the expert in your area. Again, as an HR department of one, you are the only person who's going to have this information. So you want to make sure that you are equipped to handle those employee confrontations. The next area we'll talk about is compensation. So when you're talking about compensation, it's more than just, what a person gets paid every day. We're talking about pay equity. Are you evaluating the pay bands? Do you have pay bands? Are you evaluating, the salary administration process? How do people get merit raises? How do people get promotional increases? What happens to their pay when they get demoted? All of those things play into the compensation administration program Do you have a program in place? Is it written down? All of these things, when you're putting your programs together, you want to make sure you keep it into consideration, because you want to be as consistent as possible, but you also want to be equitable, not necessarily just for what's going on within your organization, so employees to employees, but also within your market. What is the compensation level of your city, of your geographic area, whether you're in the Midwest or whether you're in the South? How does that compare to your industry professionals around you? All these things play into your compensation strategy. So again, when I'm talking about compensation, if that's starting to give you some heartburn, write that down to know that's an area where you want to do a little bit more research. So next we'll talk about employee relations. And I think that oftentimes when people talk about HR, they're probably talking about employee relations, because again, HR, we deal with the people. So typically in this area, we're talking about, employee events or employee surveys. We're trying to get a finger on the pulse of what is going on within the organization. You also have things such as dealing with difficult situations. So whether it's, conflict resolution between a manager and employee, or between, differing beliefs and things of that nature. Employee relations is anything dealing with the way employees are related to within the organization, pretty much. It's the simplest way I can explain it. But if I say those things in terms of putting surveys together and evaluating the results and figuring out, okay, well, just because there's a causal relationship, does that mean that it's actionable? All those things to make sure that you are not just looking at the numbers and the data, but you're able to read the numbers and the data in an effective way. So again, if employee relations is an area where you are not your strongest, write it down and put it on your plan so that you can go back and review it. Next, we'll talk about employee development. So employee development is not necessarily always a bad thing. Employee development could be creating things like career paths for your employees. If you know that people typically come in an introductory position or a ground level position, what are the ways they can grow into the career? Is there a plan in place? I know that often employers right now are trying to create that, because employees today in 2022 want to know that there's a place for them in their organization. So just a little side note, if you find yourself going through a lot of turnover and you're wondering why people are leaving, make sure you're doing exit interviews. I'm probably sure that a lot of things you're going to see is the other organization has more growth opportunities. So again, when you're putting things in place for employee development, it's not always just putting someone on a performance improvement plan, or you're counseling them, or you're trying to make sure they're doing the right thing performance wise or behavior wise. Sometimes it's also to the benefit of the organization and to the employee. You're putting things in place for the employee to be retained, and you're developing them in the process. So keep those things in mind when it comes to employee development. So if all those things that I just mentioned kind of gave you a little bit of a panic attack, just write it down. It's not a bad thing at all. The goal here, the goal of this entire video is not to show you how much you don't know. The goal of this video is to give you a plan to let you know where you can go next. I think too often we sit in our feelings and we're not really sure why we feel that way. You might be feeling like, hey, I know that there's so much more that I can know. I know there's so much more that I can do, but I don't know where to start. That's why I made this video, because I want you to know how you can break out of that and put an actionable plan in place. So we just talked about employee development, but now there's also organizational development. So when you're talking about organizational development, that's often where we're talking about, culture. How is your organizational? So when we're talking about organizational development, that's where we're talking about culture, the culture of your organization. It starts with senior leadership, it starts with your CEO, but the HR department is ultimately responsible for making sure that the culture remains as the CEO will have it to remain. Also, we're talking about succession planning. So when you're looking at the structure of the organization, you want to make sure there are things in place to make sure that you are not only retaining people with the employee development spectrum, but that you are also putting things in place for that. There is succession planning. So if someone leaves, so there's a plan for someone else to fill that position. It's not always going to be as seamless as I just said there, but you want to know that either you're developing your people from within or you're preparing to bring them in from the outside. If you're not thinking about those things from an organizational standpoint, it's going to be difficult when it gets to the point where your business grows, and it's going to be more difficult for you to know what to do next. I've learned it's best to go ahead and build the things now when you don't even need it, maybe, so that when you do need it, you can pull it out and then you can show like, hey, I've been thinking about this and this is where I think we should go. So again, as we're going through these lists, and I'm rattling off all of these ways that you can hone and find like your areas of your strengths. Like, oh yeah, I know that. Or like, I have not heard any of those words before. You need to know that so that you can plan and you can prepare to build your career with intention. So the next area is talent acquisition. So a lot of times people just think it's more like hiring and firing or things like that, but it's a lot of things. It's sourcing candidates. Where are you going to get your candidates from? Are you going to use one applicant tracking system or one posting mechanism? How are you going to interview them? Are you doing group interviews, individual interviews, panel interviews, phone interviews? And then who's doing the interviews? Are you asking the right questions? Are you asking legal questions, things of that nature? Are you training your managers if they're the ones doing the interviews? And then also there's onboarding, there's offer preparation. There's all these things that go into acquiring talent. So it's more than just posting on a job board, getting resumes and bringing them into the organization. You and I both know there's a whole lot more that happens from the time the job is posted to the time the person's in the seats. And you even know that even after the offer is made, sometimes the person never gets to the seat because sometimes they ghost you and they just go somewhere else. But what are some things you can do to make sure that doesn't happen as often? So again, with talent acquisition, it's an entire discipline. In each of these disciplines that I've listed, there are people who specialize in each of these areas. And as an HR department of one, you are responsible for knowing it all. If your CEO comes to you and has a question about any of these areas, they're going to expect you to give an answer. So I'm saying all these things for you today so that you can start building a plan again, so you can know, okay, well, this is where I know I need to grow, and this is where I know that I'm fine. And then I'll put this next category together. It's not necessarily together, but I'm going to put it together for time's sake because this video is getting longer than I anticipated it would be. But I'm going to say safety and compliance. So with safety, talking about things like workers' compensation and OSHA regulations and things of that nature. And then from the compliance piece, all of the state and federal laws that you are required to follow as an organization, whether it's within your state or whether it's within the nation or wherever you are. So you have to know whatever laws apply or are applicable to your organization. If you're in an industry that's regulated by a governing body, you need to know that. If you are, over a certain amount of employees and you are under the governing laws of a certain regulation federally, you should know that as well. So make sure that you are aware of the laws that are responsible or the laws that are navigating what you do day to day. Because the last thing you really want to do is be caught between a rock and a hard place, making decisions outside of what's necessary. So the goal of this video is not to make you feel worse about yourself or bad about yourself. Quite the opposite. The goal of this video is to remind you of how much you actually do know, but then also to let you know that there's still areas for you to grow. Before, when I was in HR department of one, I remember very, very vividly, I knew that my supervisor thought the world of me, thinks the world of me, but couldn't really adequately evaluate me because they didn't know what all goes into what I do day to day. And I found that to be challenging because I'm like, if I'm doing my job well and you think I'm doing my job well, everything is great. But how can you tell me if there's any deficiencies? So I had to learn to identify those deficiencies myself. So if you have not gone on the path to identify those yourself, I hope you found this video helpful. Again, the goal is to give you some overarching ideas of where you can kind of shore up your toolkit so that you can be an effective HR professional. And that's going to help you to become a more effective HR leader and a leader outside of the HR space if you want to start to branch out into other areas. So a little backstory about me. I started as an unpaid intern when I was in college. And after that unpaid intern ended in 4 months, I then started working as a temporary HR assistant. And then I became an HR assistant. And then I was an HR assistant for about 1.5 years until I graduated from college. Then I became an HR generalist, working under a senior HR manager. Then she had to move out of the country, and I became an HR department of one. And I was an HR department of one as an HR generalist for about 2 years before being promoted to HR manager because of doing the things and becoming an expert in my field. But from there, again, as an HR department of one, I'm still the only person. And I think at one point I felt stuck, like, gosh, there's nowhere else for me to grow. But I kept honing my skills. I kept learning more things. I kept volunteering outside of my organization to build the HR community within my local area. So then I became senior HR manager. And then I became AVP of administration and HR, which was still mostly HR. And right now, I serve in an organization as Vice President of Administration and Human Resources. So I lead not only HR, which is now outside of myself is 2 additional HR employees, but I also lead a training and development team and a compliance team. And none of those things would have been possible if I did not hone what I was doing before when I was in the HR department of one. I think it's so important that no matter where you are in your career, don't despise the small beginnings. And when I say small beginnings, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean small beginnings just relative to where you want to be. I started in a small place, but the way I've been able to expand my career and expand my mind has been intentional. And I'm trying to share this blueprint with you so that you can also start writing these down, taking some notes to make sure that you are growing your career in an intentional way as well. So I hope that you found this conversation helpful. Hope it's given you some things to think on, to chew on, to mull over as you're looking to build your HR career with intention. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to dig into any of these areas with me any deeper, feel free to click the link down below. You can book a discovery call with me. You can pick my brain about anything that you want to offer, any questions that you have for me, to know whether you want to move your career from one stage to the next. But also, if you have not downloaded the HR Department of One guide on 5 things that your HR career demands, I invite you to do that as well. Click the link below and you can hit that free guide so that you can go ahead and start that career journey intentionally. Again, my word of the rest of the year is intention. And I think it's so important to do things with purpose and on purpose. So my name is Brittany Graddick, CEO and founder of Talented Teams Consulting. I am so glad that you've taken the time to watch this video. I pray that it's been helpful for you. And if there's any way that I can help in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out at all. Thank you so much and talk to you soon. Bye.